It's become a staple of science fiction now that spaceships can, well, they can do this. I'm Will, and today we're talking about that thing that spaceships do when they go really fast. More specifically, the sound that thing makes. Let's call it a jump to light speed, because each use of this effect is called something different. In Star Wars, it's called a jump to hyperspace or light speed, but in Star Trek, it's a warp. I'm going to talk about how a sound designer tackles something like this, and I'm going to try and create my own example for you guys to listen to. Let's start with FTL, a short film made by Adam Stern, posted by the YouTube channel Dust.
Marked.
The thing that jumped out to me the most while I watched this was that wobbly sound they used for the visual effect directly after the jump. See how the stars bend after the ship leaves? This highlights a very important part of sound design, the visuals. How do you design a sound for something like this? Something that doesn't make sound. If it's fictional and doesn't have a real-world counterpart, or it's abstract like the bending of space-time, or because it's in a vacuum and it wouldn't make a sound anyway? Well, the most obvious answer is to find out what is unique and interesting about this specific idea and relate that to something recognizable to the listener. To do this, look past what the visuals literally are and think about what they're similar to. Seeing space bend like this might make the sound designer think of the sound other things make when they bend and wobble. Yeah, okay, well, now imagine that, but slow it down and sync it up with the video, and pitch it down to convey a sense of size. Much better. A sound designer is pretty much always going to create their sounds in a way that support the visuals. Very rarely will things be the other way around. Tying the visuals to something that sounds familiar to the listener is a great way to get started when you're stuck. Another technique is to think about the function of the sound, but I'll probably talk about that in another video. Attempting to tie otherworldly visuals with real-world sounds, as opposed to synthesized sound, is something that sound designer Ben Burtt has done in the Star Wars films from the beginning. And my next example is one of the most stunning examples of faster than light travel in the history of film, albeit a controversial one for the Star Wars fanbase. Now I know Ben didn't actually work on The Last Jedi, but he certainly set the rules and framework for what the Star Wars universe sounds like. And unless azquotes.com is lying to me, he says that when you're trying to create illusions with sound, especially in a science fiction or fantasy movie, that pulling sounds from the world around us is a great way to cement that illusion. And this idea is still used in countless modern films, TV programs, and games. Now I'm just going to play that sound again, and I want you to ignore the initial explosion and focus on the rumbling sound afterwards. What do you think they recorded to get that sound? You know what I hear? A wheelie bin. Or you might call it a dumpster in the US. Just listen. Okay, now dampen the highs and boost the lows, a little bit of reverb and a little bit of compression, and there you go, an exact replica. Well, okay, not exact, but it's close. Now I know this isn't technically the sound of the jump, it's the sound of the supremacy being destroyed, but that's because the sound of the jump is missing. And that's another very important part of sound design, silence. Silence is dramatic and powerful, and should be used to emphasize moments of suspense. This is obviously a long silence for a massive moment in the movie, but you can use small silences or simply just dips in volume to convey power and weight to all kinds of sounds, like the seismic charge in Star Wars. Or even D.Va's ult in Overwatch. Okay, let's get back on track. I think it's time to talk about Star Trek. Now this is a movie where Ben Burtt did actually work on the sound. The modern Star Trek movies have very loud and bombastic sound design. These clips come from a great video called The Sound of Star Trek, from a great channel called The Sound of Cinema. They've compiled loads of great sounds from Star Trek, including the sound of the warp drives, and at this point in the compilation, you'll notice one thing: distortion. Distortion is something that we typically try and avoid when it comes in the form of digital clipping, but clipping can be used creatively, and when designing rocket boosters and explosions, it's almost a necessity. The most controlled way of getting this particular type of distortion, I think, is by crushing the sound with something like a brick wall limiter. I'm going to start with this sound I got in a free library called Cinematic Series offered by boomlibrary.com. I chose this because it's really bassy. I used a soft compressor to catch the initial impact a little bit, as well as using a fade to dampen it further. I then added more bass frequencies to make the sound really boomy, and it actually started to clip here. Next in the chain is a saturator set to full saturation, but I backed off a little bit on the dry-wet knob to keep some of the clarity, before finally using a limiter to absolutely crush the sound. This is the result. Right now, it's a little dark sounding, but keep in mind this is just one layer in a whole scene, which brings me to my next point, layering. Now, it's a bit redundant of me to say layering is a useful tool for sound designers, because layering is used in 99% of the sounds we make. That's not to say that every sound needs to be layered, because of course some sounds are quite simple. It's just that layering is much more than just useful, it's essential. A sound designer saying layering is a useful tool for designing sound is like a lumberjack saying a chainsaw is a useful tool for chopping down trees. Yeah, you can cut a tree down without a chainsaw, but in a commercial project, 99% of the time, you won't. So now I'm going to show you how I went about creating and layering sound effects to a clip I took from a Star Citizen trailer. I'm going to play it to you without any sound just so you get an idea of what it's like for a sound designer to work from scratch with nothing to copy or have as a reference. Okay, first up, visuals. Immediately we can see electricity sparking around the ship, so I've got a sample here of a zapping noise. First, I chopped up and placed the sample to fit the picture, and I thought, right now it sounded too aggressive and too sharp for my ears, so I used a short reverb with the dry-wet knob all the way wet to soften the sound. Another thing I decided to do is automate a pitch shift effect and a tremolo effect that really increased the intensity, added character, and added movement too. After adding an additional layer of electricity and delay and reverb as a finishing touch, this is space after all, here's the sound so far. Yeah, that's not too bad, but let's try adding a silence because I think it would work really well. If I automate the volume, I can cut the sound off to create suspense. I'm also going to bump up the volume for the transient to stick out a bit more. That's better. Okay, the next thing I wanted to add was bass. I used that boomy overcompressed layer from the Star Trek example and the wheelie bin sound from earlier as well, along with a thunderclap sound I created in Reason. I couldn't resist putting in one final layer though. I recreated the seismic charge effect from earlier. I started with another sound I got from the Boom Cinematic Series free library and stacked 6 delays on top of each other. The individual parts aren't mind-blowing, but when played all at once, you'll get the full effect. Let's hear it. Let's see how it compares to the original in a full mix. I love the original, but creating this was a really fun exercise. And I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, and feel free to leave feedback about my first attempt at a YouTube video as well. I'm going to keep going with more of these kind of videos if people like them, so subscribe for my next one.